A woman's hand drops an earring on a cliff's edge. Then she's gone. Lillian Carver vanishes into the Cornish dusk, leaving only whispers of deceit. A hidden locket, a trail of smoke, a house of Hercule Poirot unravels a mystery, where every clue hides a betrayal. Did she fall, or was she pushed? Enter Ravencliff Hall's shadows in the disappearance at dusk where the truth could kill. Chapter 1. The summons to Ravencliff morning was one of those crisp, golden affairs that seem to promise clarity, but often conceal the stirrings of mystery. Hercule Poirot sat at his breakfast table in his immaculate London flat, the silver coffee pot gleaming beside a single porcelain cup of steaming tisane. The sunlight, filtering through the lace curtains, cast delicate patterns on the polished mahogany, and Poirot, ever precise, adjusted the alignment of his spoon with a flick of his manicured finger. His moustache, a masterpiece of symmetry, quivered slightly as he savored the herbal aroma. A moment of calm before the inevitable intrusion of the world's chaos. It was then that the post arrived, delivered by the discreet Mrs. Turner, his housekeeper, whose soft knock barely disturbed the morning's tranquility. Among the usual letters a bill, an invitation to a tedious society function, and a note from an old acquaintance was a telegram, its urgency evident in the stark, typed letters. Poirot slit the envelope with his silver letter opener, his movements deliberate, as if the act itself were a prelude to unraveling a puzzle. The message was brief, but compelling. Mr. Poirot, your presence urgently requested at Ravencliff Hall. Cornwall, my niece, Lillian Carver, vanished last evening at dusk. Police, helpless. I beg your aid. Amelia Hawthorne. Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, narrowed as he read the words again. A disappearance at dusk, he murmured, his voice soft but resonant with curiosity. The hour when light and shadow play their tricks, when the eye is deceived and the heart, perhaps betrayed. He tapped the telegram against his chin, his mind already sifting through possibilities. A young woman vanished, and a family in distress. Such was the canvas upon which Poirot's genius would paint the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings, who had joined Poirot for breakfast, looked up from his toast, a smear of marmalade clinging finals, a moment of carelessness that Poirot would never have tolerated in himself. "What's that, old chap? Trouble brewing?" he asked, his honest face creasing with concern. Poirot handed him the telegram, his expression one of studied calm. Trouble, mon ami, is never far when a young lady vanishes at such a poetic hour. Dusk, Hastings, it is the time of secrets. Hastings read the telegram, his brow furrowing. Good heavens, Poirot. Ravencliff Hall sounds like a grim sort of place. Do you think it's foul play? Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Foul play, accident, or flight, these are but hypotheses. The truth, it lies in the details, and the details are at Ravencliff. We must go, and quickly. Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's sudden decisions, nodded. Right. I'll pack a bag. Cornwall's a bit of a trek, isn't it? Indeed, said Poirot, rising with the grace of a man who never hurried, yet always arrived precisely when needed. But for Hercule Poirot, no distance is too great for the truth. By noon, they were aboard a train rattling through the English countryside, the fields giving way to the wild, windswept moors of Cornwall. Poirot gazed out the window, his thoughts hidden behind an impassive mask, while Hastings fidgeted, eager for action. The journey was long, and the train's rhythmic clatter was punctuated only by the occasional cry of a gull as they neared the coast. At last, they arrived at a small, windswept station. where a chauffeured car awaited to carry them to Ravencliff Hall. The mansion loomed on a cliff's edge, a Gothic edifice of weathered grey stone that seemed to grow out of the rock itself. Its towers pierced the stormy sky, and the windows glowed faintly, like the eyes of a wary beast. The sea roared below, a restless counterpoint to the eerie stillness of the estate. As they stepped from the car, a chill wind tugged at Poirot's perfectly tailored coat, but he merely adjusted his hat and strode toward the entrance, his cane clicking against the gravel dot. Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne greeted them in the grand hall, a cavernous space lined with dark oak panels and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. She was a woman of perhaps 60, frail but with a spine of steel, her silver hair pinned tightly beneath a black lace cap. Her eyes, a faded blue, were rimmed with exhaustion, yet her voice was steady. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming so swiftly," she said, clasping his hand. "I am at my wit's end. Lillian, my niece, is gone, and no one can say where." Poirot bowed slightly, his demeanor a blend of courtesy and command. "Madame, you have my deepest sympathies. But rest assured, Hercule Poirot shall leave no stone unturned. Please, introduce me to those present, and tell me all you know of this disappearance." Mrs. Hawthorne led them to a drawing room, its heavy velvet curtains drawn against the gathering storm. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows over the assembled company. The air was thick with unspoken tension, and keen gaze missed nothing: the nervous twitch of a hand, the averted glance, the too careful posture. He was introduced to the household, each member a piece in the puzzle he would soon assemble. First was Mr. Edward Hawthorne, Mrs. Hawthorne's son, a man in his late 30s, with the reserved air of a solicitor accustomed to discretion. His dark suit was impeccable, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as he shook Poirot's hand. "I hope you can help us, Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly. "Lillian was very dear to us." Miss Sylvia Trent, Lillian's cousin, was a striking contrast, a young woman of 25, with auburn hair and a defiant tilt to her chin. "An artist," Mrs. Hawthorne explained, whose vibrant watercolors adorned the walls. Sylvia's smile was bright but brittle, and she toyed with a paintbrush as she spoke. "Lillian wouldn't just run off," she said sharply. "Something's happened to her. I know it." Professor Marcus Eldridge, a family friend, was a wiry man in his 50s, his face weathered by years of archaeological digs. His tweed jacket smelled faintly of pipe smoke, and his eyes gleamed with an almost feverish intensity as he spoke of local Cornish legends. "Ravencliff has its secrets, Monsieur Poirot," he said, leaning forward. "The cliffs are said to be haunted by a spirit that lures wanderers at dusk." Mrs. Dorothy Wren, the housekeeper, was a severe woman with grey-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Her hands twisted in her apron as she stood by the door, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I saw Miss Lillian head toward the cliff path," she said in a low voice. "She seemed troubled, but I thought nothing of it until she didn't return." The final member was Mr. Julian Marsh, a journalist with a disarming smile and a notebook tucked under his arm. His blonde hair was slightly tousled, and his easy charm seemed calculated to put others at ease. "I'm here researching the history of Ravencliff," he explained, "but Lillian's disappearance, it's turned everything upside down." Mrs. Hawthorne recounted the events of the previous evening. A family dinner had been held to celebrate Lillian's engagement to Lieutenant James Norton, a naval officer currently stationed abroad. Lillian, a quiet girl of 22 with delicate features and soft brown hair, had seemed distracted. At dusk, she excused herself, saying she needed air, and walked toward the cliff path. No one saw her again. The local police had searched the cliffs and the shore below, but found no trace. "It's as if the earth swallowed her," Mrs. Hawthorne whispered, her hands trembling. Poirot listened in silence, his fingers steepled before him. "Madame, may I see the place where Mademoiselle Lillian was last seen?" he asked at last. Mrs. Hawthorne nodded, and Edward led the way through a side door to a narrow path that wound along the cliff's edge. The wind howled, carrying the salt temps of the sea, and the sky was a tumult of grey clouds. The path was treacherous, bordered by gorse and jagged rocks, with a sheer drop to the churning waves below. Poirot moved cautiously, his cane probing the uneven ground. Near the cliff's edge, he paused, his eyes scanning the scene. There, glinting in the fading light, was a single pearl earring, half buried in the dirt. Poirot knelt, his gloved hand carefully retrieving it. "This belonged to Mademoiselle Lillian?" he asked, holding it up. Mrs. Hawthorne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Yes, she always wore those earrings. A gift from her mother." Poirot pocketed the earring, his expression unreadable. "There is no sign of a struggle," he observed. "No broken branches, no disturbed earth. Yet this earring, it was not dropped carelessly. It is a clue, perhaps a message." He turned to Edward. "Monsieur, what was the state of mind of your cousin before she vanished?" Edward hesitated, his jaw tightening. "She was quiet. Lillian was always quiet. But lately, she seemed anxious. I thought it was the engagement. Lieutenant Norton is a fine man, but—" he trailed off, glancing at his mother. "But—" Poirot prompted, his voice gentle but insistent. Edward sighed. "I didn't approve. Norton's family is respectable, but there are rumors, debts, gambling. I told Lillian she deserved better." Poirot nodded, filing away the information. He turned to Sylvia, who lingered nearby, her arms crossed. "And you, mademoiselle? Did you notice anything unusual about your cousin?" Sylvia's eyes flashed. "She was unhappy, if that's what you mean. But she wouldn't talk about it. Not to me, anyway." Her tone was defensive, and Poirot noted the way her fingers tightened around the paintbrush. The wind grew fiercer, and Mrs. Hawthorne shivered. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, it will be dark soon. Will you stay the night? We have rooms prepared." Poirot inclined his head. "Mercy, madame. I shall require time to observe, to listen. The truth, it is like a shy bird, it must be approached with care." They returned to the drawing room, where tea was served. Poirot sipped his delicately, his eyes darting from face to face. Hastings, less subtle, leaned toward him and whispered, "What do you make of it, Poirot? Accident, or something worse?" Poirot's lips curved slightly. "Patience, Hastings. The cliff tells one story, the earring another. But the human heart tells the truth, if one knows how to listen." As the conversation resumed, Poirot's attention was drawn to Professor Eldridge, who was expounding on a Cornish legend about the Dusk wraith, a spectral figure said to lure victims to their doom at twilight. His enthusiasm bordered on obsession, and Poirot wondered if the professor's tales were a distraction or something more. Mrs. Wren, meanwhile, hovered near the door, her eyes darting to Edward whenever he spoke. Julian Marsh scribbled in his notebook, his smile never reaching his eyes. Poirot set down his teacup, his mind a whirl of impressions. The earring, the cliff, the family's guarded words, each was a thread in a tapestry of deception. He recalled the telegram's stark words, "Vanished last evening at dusk." The timing intrigued him. Dusk was a liminal hour, neither day nor night, a time when intentions could be cloaked in ambiguity. Had Lillian fallen, fled, or been taken? The answer lay not in the windswept path, but in the secrets of Ravencliff Hall. As the clock struck 6, Mrs. Hawthorne rose. "Dinner will be served soon. I hope you'll join us, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings. Perhaps you'll find something by then." Poirot smiled enigmatically. "The evening is young, madame. And Hercule Poirot, he does not rest until the truth is found." The storm broke as they moved to the dining room, rain lashing the windows like an impatient interrogator. Poirot's mind was already at work, arranging the fragments of the puzzle. The disappearance at dusk was no mere accident. He felt it in his bones. But whose hand had cast the shadow over Lillian Carver? The answer, he knew, would require all his ingenuity to uncover. The dining room was a grand affair, its long table set with silver and crystal that gleamed in the candlelight. The meal was simple but elegant: roast lamb, potatoes, and a delicate consomme, but the atmosphere was heavy with suspicion. Poirot observed the interplay of glances: Edward's stern look at Sylvia, Sylvia's defiant stare at Julian, Mrs. Wren's anxious hovering, and the professor's distracted muttering about ancient curses. Hastings, ever the optimist, attempted to lighten the mood with talk of London, but even he sensed the undercurrent of unease. After dinner, Poirot requested to see Lillian's room. Mrs. Hawthorne led him upstairs, her steps slow and deliberate. The room was feminine but understated, with pale blue wallpaper and a four-poster bed draped in white lace. A vanity held a silver brush and a bottle of lavender perfume, its scent lingering faintly. Poirot's eyes scanned every detail: the neatly folded shawl, the open novel on the bedside table, the half-finished embroidery of a rose. He opened the wardrobe, noting the orderly dresses, all modest and practical. Mademoiselle Lillian, she was not one for extravagance, he remarked. Mrs. Hawthorne nodded. She was sensible, unlike Sylvia. Always reading, always thinking. I can't imagine why she'd wander off alone. Poirot's fingers brushed against a small wooden box on the dresser. Inside was a photograph of Lillian with a young man in naval uniform, Lieutenant Norton, presumably. Her smile was shy but genuine, his arm protectively around her. They were happy, Poirot asked. Mrs. Hawthorne's lips tightened. I thought so, but Edward. He worried Norton wasn't good enough. Poirot closed the box, his mind cataloguing the family's dynamics. A disapproving cousin, a protective aunt, a spirited artist, a nosy journalist, an eccentric professor, and a nervous housekeeper. It had a role, but which was the villain? Or was there a villain at all? He recalled the earring, its pearl, catching the light like a beacon. A clue, yes, but to what end? As they descended to the drawing room, Poirot paused on the staircase, struck by a sudden thought. Madame was Lillian in the habit of walking the cliff path alone? Mrs. Hawthorne frowned. Not often. She preferred the garden. But yesterday she seemed restless. She said she needed to think. To think, Poirot echoed, his voice soft. And what, I wonder, required such solitude? The evening wore on, the storm's fury unabated. Poirot declined a game of bridge, preferring to observe. Sylvia sketched in a corner, her pencil scratching furiously. Edward reviewed papers, his face a mask of concentration. Julian engaged Mrs. Hawthorne in conversation, his questions probing yet charming. Professor Eldridge pored over a tattered book of Cornish folklore, muttering to himself. Mrs. Wren appeared only to clear the tea tray, her movements swift and silent. Hastings, restless, joined Poirot by the fire. "What's your next move?" "Poirot, the police have searched the cliffs, but you seem to have something up your sleeve." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The sleeve, mon ami, is empty, but the mind it is full. The earring is a beginning, not an end. Tomorrow we shall explore. Further, the cliff path, the house, the hearts of those within, they will speak to Hercule Poirot." As the clock chimed 10, the household retired, their footsteps echoing in the vast corridors. Poirot lingered, staring into the dying embers of the fire. The disappearance at dusk was a riddle wrapped in shadow, but he was no stranger to darkness. The truth, he knew, was merely a matter of illumination. He rose, adjusting his tie with precision. "To bed, Hastings. The morning will bring new light, and with it, perhaps, the first thread of the truth." As they ascended to their rooms, the wind howled like a mournful cry, and Poirot's thoughts turned to the earring, the cliff, and the girl who had vanished into the twilight. The puzzle was complex, but Hercule Poirot thrived on complexity. The disappearance at dusk would not remain a mystery for long. Chapter 2. The House of Secrets. The storm had spent its fury by morning, leaving Ravencliff Hall shrouded in a damp mist that clung to the cliffs like a whispered secret. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, stood at his bedroom window, gazing at the turbulent sea below. The waves crashed with a rhythm that echoed the pulse of the mystery. Before him a young woman vanished. A single earring left behind, and a household teeming with unspoken truths. His mustache, meticulously groomed, gave a slight quiver as he contemplated the task ahead. "The house, it holds its secrets tightly," he murmured. "But Hercule Poirot, he is a most persistent guest." Captain Hastings joined him for breakfast. In the dining room, where a sideboard groaned under the weight of kedgeree, kippers, and freshly baked scones, Hastings, ever the enthusiast for a hearty meal, piled his plate high, oblivious to the faint disapproval in Poirot's glance. "Slept well, Poirot?" he asked, spreading butter with gusto. "This place gives me the creeps, I must say. Oh, those shadows and creaking boards." Poirot sipped his Carfa au lait, his expression serene but alert. "The house, mon ami, it speaks in creaks and shadows, just as people speak in words and glances. We must listen to both." He set down his cup with precision, his eyes already scanning the room for clues invisible to others. Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne entered, her face pale but composed, followed by her son, Edward, whose stiff posture betrayed a sleepless night. Sylvia Trent trailed behind, her auburn hair loosely pinned, a sketchbook tucked under her arm. Professor Marcus Eldridge was already seated, engrossed in a leather-bound tome, his glasses perched precariously on his nose. Mrs. Dorothy Wren bustled about, ensuring the coffee urn was filled, her movements brisk but her eyes darting nervously. Julian Marsh, the journalist, arrived last, his smile as polished as his cufflinks, a fresh notebook in hand. Poirot observed them all, noting the subtle tensions, the way Edward avoided Sylvia's gaze, the professor's distracted mutterings, Mrs. Wren's hurried glances toward the door. Breakfast passed in strained civility, with conversation limited to the weather and the quality of the scones. Poirot, however, was not one for idle chatter when a puzzle beckoned. He rose, dabbing his lips with a napkin, and addressed Mrs. Hawthorne. Madame, with your permission, I should like to question each member of the household today. The disappearance of Mademoiselle Lilienette requires the light of truth to be shown upon every corner. Mrs. Hawthorne nodded, her hands clasped tightly. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Anything to find my Lilian. Shall we begin in the library? It's quiet there. The library was a vast room, its walls lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, their spines a testament to centuries of knowledge. A massive oak table dominated the center, flanked by leather armchairs that smelled faintly of polish and old paper. A stained glass window cast colored light across the floor, painting the scene with an almost ecclesiastical glow. Poirot seated himself at the table, his notebook open, his fountain pen poised. Hastings stood by the window, ready to take mental notes, though Poirot knew his friend's memory was less reliable than his own. First to be questioned was Edward Hawthorne. He entered with the air of a man accustomed to authority, yet his fingers betrayed him, fidgeting with a cufflink as he sat. Monsieur Hawthorne, Poirot began, his voice smooth as velvet. You told me last night that you disapproved of Mademoiselle Lilian's engagement. Why was this so? Edward's jaw tightened, but he answered steadily, Lieutenant Norton is not what he seems. He's charming, yes, but I've heard things debts, reckless behavior. Lilian deserved someone stable. I told her as much, but she was stubborn. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And this conversation, when did it take place? The morning of her disappearance, Edward admitted. We argued in the garden. She was upset, but I thought she'd come round. Poirot made a note, his pen scratching softly. And where were you, monsieur, at dusk, when Mademoiselle Lilian vanished? Edward hesitated, his gaze flickering to the window. I was in my study, working on some papers, alone. Alone, Poirot repeated, his tone neutral but probing. And no one can confirm this. Edward's eyes narrowed. No one, but I had no reason to harm Lilian. She was my cousin, practically a sister. Poirot inclined his head, dismissing him with a polite nod. Merci, monsieur, we shall speak again. Sylvia Trent was next, her entrance marked by a swirl of her scarf and a defiant toss of her head. She sat, crossing her arms, her sketchbook placed defiantly on the table. Mademoiselle Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, You said last night that Lilian was unhappy. What made you so certain? Sylvia's lips pursed, as if weighing her words. Lilian was always quiet, but lately she was distant. She'd stare out at the sea for hours, like she was looking for something. I tried to talk to her, but she'd just smile and change the subject. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. And this restlessness, did it begin with her engagement? Sylvia shrugged, but her fingers tightened on her sketchbook. Maybe. She loved James Lieutenant Norton, but she was worried. About something. She wouldn't tell me what. Poirot's pen paused. You are an artist, mademoiselle, you observe. Did you see Lilian leave for the cliff path at dusk? Sylvia's gaze dropped to her hands. I saw her go out, yes. She looked determined. I thought she just needed to clear her head. Poirot noted the hesitation, the slight flush in her cheeks. And you, where were you at that hour? In my studio, painting, she said quickly. I didn't see anything else. Poirot smiled, faintly dismissing her. Your paintings, mademoiselle, they may yet tell me more than your words. Professor Eldridge followed, his tweed jacket rumpled, his eyes bright with a scholar's zeal. He launched into a discourse on Cornish folklore before Poirot could ask a question. Ravencliff, Monsieur Poirot, is steeped in legend. The Dusk. Wraith, they call it, a spirit that appears at twilight, luring souls to the cliffs. I've studied such tales for years. Poirot raised a hand, cutting through the enthusiasm. Fascinating, monsieur, but I am more concerned with facts than phantoms. Where were you at dusk yesterday? Eldridge blinked, as if startled by the mundane. In the garden, sketching some old standing stones. I'm cataloguing them for a paper. I didn't see Lillian, if that's what you mean. Poirot's moustache twitched. And these stones, they are near the cliff path. Not far, Eldridge admitted, but I was focused on my work. I heard nothing, saw nothing. Poirot made another note, his expression unreadable. Merci, Professor. Your legends, they are most intriguing. Mrs. Dorothy Wren entered next, her hands twisting in her apron, her face a mask of controlled anxiety. Madame Wren, Poirot began, his tone soothing. You saw Mademoiselle Lillian leave for the cliff path. Did she speak to you? Mrs. Wren shook her head. She just said she needed air. She looked pale, nervous. I told her to be careful, the path's treacherous in the evening, but she didn't listen. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, where were you after she left? In the kitchen, preparing dinner, she said firmly. I was there until we realized she was gone. Poirot studied her, noting the slight tremor in her voice. You have served this family long. You see much. Was there any small details that struck you as unusual that day? Mrs. Wren hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing, sir. Just. Miss Lillian seemed so unlike herself. Poirot dismissed her, his mind cataloguing her unease. Finally, Julian Marsh sauntered in, his smile disarming but his eyes sharp. Monsieur Marsh, Poirot said, you are here to write about Ravencliff's history, yet a disappearance is far more sensational. What do you know of Mademoiselle Lillian's fate? Marsh leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Not much, I'm afraid. I was in the drawing room, chatting with Mrs. Hawthorne, when Lillian went out. I only heard about it. When the alarm was raised, Poirot's gaze was piercing. And your research, does it involve the family's private affairs? Marsh's smile faltered. Just the house, its architecture, its legends. I'm not one for gossip, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered. We shall see, monsieur. The truth, it is often hidden in what is not said. With the interviews concluded, Poirot and Hastings returned to the cliff path, the mist now lifting to reveal a stark, windswept landscape. Poirot knelt again at the spot where the earring had been found, his gloved hands probing the earth. He discovered a faint indentation, a footprint, perhaps though blurred by the rain. Curious, he murmured. Not a woman's shoe, I think. Too broad. Hastings squinted at the ground. A man's, then. Someone followed her. Perhaps, Poirot said, rising. Or perhaps someone wished it to appear so. We must explore further. They followed the path to a rocky outcrop, where a narrow trail descended toward the sea. Poirot paused, his eyes scanning the horizon. This place, it is isolated, yet not invisible. If Lillian was taken, it was done with care. If she fled, she chose a perilous route. Back at the house, Poirot requested to see the garden, where Edward claimed to have argued with Lillian. The garden was a tangle of roses and ivy, bordered by a low stone wall. Poirot found a crushed petal near the wall, its scent still strong. A rose, he said, holding it up, freshly broken. Someone stood here, Perhaps watching. Hastings frowned. Watching Lillian or someone else? Poirot's lips curved. That mon ami is the question. As they returned to the house, Poirot's mind was a whirl of impressions. The earring, the footprint, the crushed petal, the guarded words of the household. Each was a fragment, but the picture was far from complete. The House of Secrets was beginning to speak, and Hercule Poirot was listening. Chapter 3. The scene of the vanishing the morning mist had burned away, revealing Ravencliff Hall in all its stark grandeur, a fortress of stone perched defiantly against the Cornish cliffs. The sea below churned restlessly, its waves a relentless murmur that seemed to echo the unease within the mansion's walls. Hercule Poirot, clad in a meticulously tailored overcoat, stood at the edge of the cliff path where Lillian Carver had last been seen. His cane rested lightly in his gloved hand, and his sharp green eyes scanned the terrain with the precision of a cartographer charting an unknown land. The air was sharp with salt and the faint tempts of seaweed, and Poirot's moustache quivered as he inhaled, as if the very breeze might carry a clue. Captain Hastings, bundled against the wind, joined him, his face a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Grim spot, isn't it, Poirot?" he remarked, peering over the cliff's edge to the rocks below. "A slip here, and well, it doesn't bear thinking about." Poirot's lips curved slightly, though his gaze remained fixed on the path. The mind, mon ami, must think of everything, even the unthinkable. A slip, a push, a flight, these are all possibilities. But Hercule Poirot does not assume, he observes. He gestured to the narrow, winding trail, bordered by gorse and jagged stones. "This is where Mademoiselle Lillian walked at dusk. Let us see what it tells us." The path was treacherous, its surface uneven with loose gravel and patches of damp earth. Poirot moved with care, his cane probing the ground, as if testing its honesty. He paused where the pearl earring had been found the previous evening, now marked only by a faint disturbance in the dirt. The earring, he mused, kneeling to examine the spot. It was not dropped carelessly. It lay half buried, as if placed with intent. A sign, perhaps, or a lure. Hastings frowned, rubbing his chin. "A lure? You mean someone left it too?" "Make us think Lillian fell." Poirot rose, dusting his gloves. "Or to suggest she was taken. Or, perhaps, to mark a path she chose herself." "The earring is a whisper, Hastings, but we must find what it speaks of." They continued along the path, Poirot's eyes darting from the ground to the surrounding cliffs. The trail curved sharply, descending toward a rocky outcrop that jutted over the sea. Here the wind was fiercer, tugging at Poirot's hat, which he secured with a firm hand. He stopped abruptly, his cane pointing to a cluster of gorse bushes. "Regardez, Hastings. There do, you see." Hastings squinted, then shook his head. "Just bushes. Poirot, what's caught your eye?" Poirot stepped closer, his gloved fingers brushing aside the prickly branches. Caught among the thorns was a single thread, pale blue and almost invisible against the grey-green foliage. "A thread," he said, extracting it with care and holding it to the light. "Silk, I believe. From a shawl, perhaps, or a dress." Hastings leaned in, his interest piqued. "Lillian's. Mrs. Hawthorne said she was wearing a blue shawl that evening." "Perhaps," Poirot said, pocketing the thread in a small envelope. "But we must not leap to conclusions. A thread may belong to anyone nor be placed to mislead." He straightened, his gaze sweeping the path. "There is no sign of a struggle, no broken branches, no scuffed earth. If Mademoiselle Lillian fell, it was with remarkable grace. They moved toward the cliff's edge, where the drop was sheer, the rocks below jagged and foam-flecked. Poirot stood motionless, his eyes tracing the horizon. If she fell, there would be traces of a torn garment, a dislodged stone. Yet there is nothing. This suggests either great care or no accident at all. Hastings shivered, pulling his coat tighter. You think she was taken, then? Or ran off? Poirot's moustache twitched. Both are possible, mon ami, but the absence of evidence is itself evidence. We must look closer. They retraced their steps, Poirot pausing to examine a patch of damp earth near the paths. Start. He knelt again, his cane tracing a faint outline. Another footprint, he said, his voice low. Not the same as yesterday's. This is smaller, more delicate. A woman's, perhaps, but deep, as if she stood still for some time. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Lillian's, do you think? Poirot shook his head. It is too soon to say, but it is curious, Nan. 2 footprints, one broad, one delicate, and neither clearly hers. The path, it tells a story of more than one visitor. They returned to the house, where Mrs. Hawthorne awaited them in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Have you found anything, Monsieur Poirot? She asked, her voice trembling with hope. Poirot inclined his head, his expression grave but reassuring. A thread, madame, and a footprint. Small things, but to Hercule Poirot, no detail is insignificant. May I ask, did Mademoiselle Lillian often walk this path alone? Mrs. Hawthorne frowned, her fingers tightening. Not often, she preferred. The garden, where it's safer. But that day, she seemed preoccupied. She insisted on going out, despite the wind. Poirot nodded, filing away the information. And her shawl blue silk, you said? Was it one she wore often? Yes, Mrs. Hawthorne replied. A gift from her late mother. She cherished it. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Mercy, madame. This is most helpful. He turned to Hastings as they left the drawing room. The shawl, the earring, the footprints, these are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. We must learn more of Mademoiselle Lillian's state of mind. They sought out Sylvia Trent, who was in her studio, a cluttered attic room filled with canvases and the sharp scent of turpentine. She stood before an easel, her brush poised over a half-finished seascape, the colors vivid yet troubled. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, his tone gentle, you painted your cousin often, oui. Did you ever paint her on the cliff path? Sylvia's brush paused, her eyes flickering with surprise. Once or twice, she admitted. She liked the cliffs, but she was careful that day though. She seemed different. Restless, like she was waiting for something. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Waiting, for whom? Mademoiselle Sylvia shrugged, her expression guarded. I don't know, she didn't say, but she kept looking at her watch, as if expecting someone. Poirot made a mental note, his mind turning to the possibility of a rendezvous. And you, mademoiselle, did you see anyone else on the path that evening? Sylvia shook her head, but her fingers tightened on the brush. No, I was here, painting. The light was fading, so I didn't go out. Poirot smiled faintly, dismissing her with a nod. Your art, it captures the soul of this place. Perhaps it will yet reveal more. They next sought Professor Eldridge, who was in the garden, sketching a weathered standing stone half hidden by ivy. His pencil moved with feverish energy, and he barely looked up as Poirot approached. Monsieur Poirot said, you spoke of the Dusk wraith. Is it possible Mademoiselle Lillian believed in such tales? Eldridge chuckled, adjusting his glasses. Lillian, no, she was far too sensible. But she humored me, listened to my stories. She was curious about the cliffs, though asked about old paths and caves. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Caves, you say? Are there such places near the cliff path? Eldridge nodded, pointing toward the sea. Old smugglers' caves, mostly collapsed now. One or two are still accessible, but they're dangerous. I told her to stay away. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. And you, monsieur, did you explore these caves recently? Not recently, Eldridge said, his tone defensive. I'm an archaeologist, not a spelunker. My work is with stones, not tunnels. Poirot thanked him, his mind already turning to the possibility of hidden places. He led Hastings back to the cliff path, determined to explore further. Near the outcrop, they found a narrow trail descending to a rocky cove, half hidden by gorse. The path was steep, and Poirot descended with caution, his cane steadying his steps. At the base, a shallow cave opened into the cliff, its mouth dark and damp inside. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of salt and something fainter lavender, perhaps, like Lillian's perfume. Poirot's torch swept the walls, revealing nothing but wet stone and seaweed. Yet, in a corner, he found a small, crumpled handkerchief, embroidered with the initial L. Hers, he said softly, holding it up. She was here, Hastings, or someone wishes us to think so. Hastings frowned. But why come here? To hide? To meet someone? Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. That man ami is the heart of the matter. A cave is a place of secrets, but whose? They returned to the house as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cliffs. Poirot's mind was a whirl of fragments, the thread group, the handkerchief, and the faint trace of lavender. Each was a thread in the tapestry of Lillian's disappearance, but the pattern remained elusive. As they entered Ravencliff Hall, the wind carried a mournful cry, and Poirot felt the weight of the mystery deepen. The scene of the vanishing had spoken, but its words were far from clear. Chapter 4. The Family's Shadows. The afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ravencliff Hall, casting a muted glow over the drawing room where Hercule Poirot sat, his posture as impeccable as ever. The room was a study, in contrast opulent, with its velvet upholstery and gilded mirrors, yet oppressive with the weight of unspoken secrets. The storm's aftermath had left the air damp, and the faint creak of the mansion's ancient timbers seemed to underscore the tension among its inhabitants. Poirot's green eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the assembled company, each member a potential key to the enigma of Lillian Carver's disappearance. His mustache, a perfect arc, gave a slight quiver as he sipped his tisane, the delicate porcelain cup a stark contrast to the gravity of his thoughts. Captain Hastings, seated beside him, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his honest face betraying his impatience. "This place is like a powder keg, Poirot," he whispered, leaning close. "Everyone's on edge, and no one's saying what they really think." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "Precisely, mon ami. The silence it is louder than words." But Hercule Poirot, he listens to the silences as well as the speech. He set down his cup, his movements deliberate, and turned his attention to Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne, who sat near the fire, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice smooth yet commanding, "you have told me of Mademoiselle Lillian's habits, her preference for the garden over the cliffs. Yet something drove her to the cliffed path at dusk. Can you recall any conversation, any hint? That might explain her state of mind. Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes, clouded with worry, met his. She was quieter than usual that day. She said slowly, "At breakfast, she barely touched her food. I asked if she was unwell, but she said it was nothing, just nerves about her engagement. I thought perhaps she was missing Lieutenant Norton." Poirot nodded, his pen poised over his notebook. "And this engagement, it was welcomed by all the family." Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated, her gaze flickering to her son, Edward, who stood by the window, his back rigid. "Not entirely," she admitted. Edward had reservations. He thought Lillian was too young, too trusting. Poirot's eyes followed her glance. "Monsieur Hawthorne, you spoke yesterday of your concerns about Lieutenant Norton. You mentioned debts, rumors of recklessness. Can you elaborate?" Edward turned, his expression guarded. "I only wanted to protect her," he said, his voice low but firm. "Norton's family is respectable, but I heard from a colleague in London that he's run up significant debts gambling, mostly. I told Lillian she should wait, make sure he was worthy of her. She didn't take it well." Poirot's pen scratched softly, and this conversation, it was heated. Edward's jaw tightened. It was spirited. "In the garden, as I said, she accused me of meddling, said she loved him. I left her there, near the rose arbor. That was the last I saw of her before." His voice trailed off, and he turned back to the window. Poirot's gaze shifted to Sylvia Trent, who lounged in an armchair, her sketchbook open but untouched. "Mademoiselle Sylvia, you are close to your cousin, Did she confide in you about this argument?" Sylvia's fingers toyed with a pencil, her eyes avoiding Poirot's. "She mentioned it," she said, her tone casual but strained. "Lillian was upset, said Edward was trying to control her life. But she didn't tell me much more. She was private like that." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Private, yet you sensed her unrest. Did she speak of anyone else, perhaps someone she planned to meet?" Sylvia's pencil snapped, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "She didn't say anything about meeting anyone. She just wanted to be alone, I think." Poirot made a mental note of her reaction, his eyes lingering on the broken pencil. He turned to Professor Marcus Eldridge, who was leafing through a book of Cornish maps, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Monsieur Eldridge, you have spoken of the Cliffs legends. Did Mademoiselle Lillian ever express curiosity about these tales, beyond polite interest?" Eldridge looked up, his glasses glinting in the firelight. "She asked questions, yes," he said, "about the old smugglers' paths, the caves. I thought it was just curiosity about Ravencliff's history. She seemed fascinated by the idea of hidden places." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Hidden places," he repeated softly. "And did you show her any such places?" Eldridge shook his head. "No, I warned her they were dangerous. The caves are unstable, and the tides are treacherous. I told her to stick to the gardens." Poirot nodded, filing away the professor's words. He then addressed Mrs. Doherty. Wren, who stood near the door, her hands folded tightly in her apron. "Madame Wren, you have served this family for many years. You see much, hear much. Did you overhear anything that day, any conversation, any hint that might shed light on Mademoiselle Lillian's intentions?" Mrs. Wren's lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't eavesdrop, sir," she said, her voice clipped. "But I did hear Miss Lillian and Mr. Edward in the garden. She was crying, saying she wouldn't be told what to do. I didn't think much of it. Family quarrels happen. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And after this quarrel, you saw her leave for the cliff path? Mrs. Wren nodded, her eyes darting to Edward. Yes, just before dinner. She looked determined, like she'd made up her mind about something. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Mercy, madame. Your observations are most valuable. Finally, he turned to Julian Marsh, who sat with his notebook open, his pen poised, as if to capture every word. Monsieur Marsh, your presence here is to document Ravencliff's history, yet you seem most interested in its present drama. Did you speak with Mademoiselle Lillian that day? Marsh's smile was easy, but his eyes were cautious. Only in passing, he said. I asked her about the house, its architecture. She was polite, but distracted. I didn't see her go out, but I heard the commotion when she didn't return for dinner. Poirot's pen tapped his notebook. And you, where were you at dusk? In the library, making notes, Marsh said smoothly. I was there until Mrs. Hawthorne raised the alarm. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A journalist's notes, they are a window to the truth, Nan. Perhaps you will share them with me later. With the questioning concluded, Poirot rose, his movements graceful yet purposeful. Madame Hawthorne, I should like to see the garden where this argument took place. It may hold further clues. Mrs. Hawthorne led them through a glass door to the garden, a walled enclosure of rosebeds and gravel paths, now damp from the previous night's rain. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, and Poirot moved with care, his cane avoiding puddles. He stopped at the rose arbor, where Edward had said the argument occurred. The ground was soft, and Poirot's keen eyes spotted a faint impression, a heel mark, not unlike the delicate footprint on the cliff path. Interesting, he murmured, kneeling to examine it. A woman's shoe, perhaps, but pressed deeply, as if she stood for some time, watching, perhaps, or listening. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Lillian's, do you think? Or someone else's? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That, mon ami, is the question. The garden, it is a place of beauty, but also of secrets. They continued their inspection, Poirot noting a trampled patch of grass near the wall, where the crushed rose petal had been found. Someone stood here, he said, his voice low, not casually, but with purpose. To observe, perhaps, or to conceal. Mrs. Hawthorne watched anxiously. Do you think Lillian was taken from here, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's expression was unreadable. The garden, it speaks of presence, not absence. But whose presence? That is what we must discover. As they returned to the house, Poirot's mind was a whirl of impressions, the heel mark, the trampled grass, the broken pencil, the guarded words. The family's shadows were lengthening, each member casting a silhouette of doubt. Edward's disapproval, Sylvia's defensiveness, Eldridge's tales, Mrs. Wren's unease, Marsh's curiosity, all were threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. The afternoon was waning, and Poirot felt the weight of time pressing upon him. The truth of Lillian's disappearance lay within Ravencliff's walls, but it would require all his skill to bring it to light. Chapter 5. The Hidden Letter. The late afternoon sun cast long, slanting rays through the tall windows of Ravencliff Hall, bathing the oak-panelled corridors in a golden haze that did little to dispel the chill of mystery clinging to the house. Hercule Poirot, his steps measured and deliberate, moved through the mansion with the air of a man who saw not just walls and furnishings, but the invisible threads of human motive woven into every corner. His polished shoes clicked softly on the polished floor a counterpoint to the distant roar of the sea as he made his way to Lillian Carver's bedroom. The discovery of the thread, the footprints, and the handkerchief had sharpened his focus. But he knew the heart of the puzzle lay in understanding Lillian herself, her thoughts, her fears, her secrets. Captain Hastings trailed behind, his enthusiasm tempered by the growing complexity of the case. "This place is like a maze, Poirot," he remarked, glancing at the ancestral portraits lining the hallway, their stern gazes seeming to follow their progress. "Every clue seems to lead to another question. Do you really think Lillian's room will tell us anything new?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "Mon ami, a person's private space, it is a mirror to their soul. Mademoiselle Lillian's room will speak, if we listen with care." He paused before a heavy oak door, its brass handle gleaming faintly, and knocked softly out of courtesy. Though he knew no answer would come, Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne, who had accompanied them, unlocked the door with a key from her pocket, her hands trembling slightly. "I haven't touched anything since she went missing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I kept hoping she'd come back." Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of gentle reassurance. "Madame, your care preserves the truth. Let us see what it reveals." The room was a delicate haven, its pale blue wallpaper adorned with a subtle pattern of forget-me-nots. A four-poster bed, draped in white lace, stood against one wall, its covers neatly tucked. A vanity held a silver brush, a small bottle of lavender perfume, and a framed photograph of Lillian with a young man in naval uniform, Lieutenant James Norton, Poirot presumed. The air carried a faint trace of lavender, mingling with the musty scent of an unused room. A small bookshelf held novels and a volume of poetry, their pages slightly worn, suggesting a thoughtful mind. An embroidery hoop lay on a side table, a half-finished rose stitched in vibrant red thread. Poirot moved with the precision of a surgeon, his gloved hands touching nothing at first, only observing. "A room of simplicity," he murmured, "yet it speaks of a woman who cherished beauty and order." He approached the vanity, noting the careful arrangement of the brush and perfume. He lifted the photograph, studying the faces, Lillian's shy smile, Norton's protective arm around her. "They were happy, he asked Mrs. Hawthorne. She nodded, her eyes misting. She loved him dearly. "I thought it was just the strain of his absence that troubled her." Poirot set the photograph down and turned to the bookshelf. He ran a finger along the spines, pausing at a slim, leather-bound diary tucked between two novels. "This," he said, extracting it carefully, "may hold the key to her heart." The diary was locked, its brass clasp gleaming. "Madame, may I have your permission to open it?" Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps find her, yes." Poirot produced a small tool from his pochita, delicate instrument designed for such purposes, and deftly opened the clasp. The diary's pages were filled with Lillian's neat, looping handwriting, detailing her daily life walks in the garden, books read, thoughts on her engagement. Poirot's eyes scanned the entries, his expression unreadable. Then, tucked between two pages, he found a folded letter, its edges slightly creased. He unfolded it with care, his gaze sharpening as he read. The letter was from Lieutenant James Norton, dated 2 days before Lillian's disappearance. "My dearest Lillian, I cannot bear this distance any longer. Come to London, I beg you. Meet me at the usual place on Friday. We can start anew, away from all this. I know you're troubled, but trust in our love. burn this after reading. Yours forever, James Poirot's moustache quivered. Most interesting, he said softly, handing the letter to Hastings. A plea to flee, yet she did not go. Why? Hastings read the letter, his brow furrowing. Good Lord, Poirot, you think she was planning to run off with Norton, but why stay, then? Eyes gleamed. That mon ami is the question. Perhaps she changed her mind. Perhaps she was prevented. Or perhaps... He trailed off, his mind turning to possibilities he was not yet ready to voice. Mrs. Hawthorne, peering over his shoulder, gasped. She never mentioned this. Why would she keep it secret? Poirot's voice was gentle but firm. Because, Madame, the heart keeps its own counsel. This letter, it suggests a plan, but also a conflict. We must learn more. He continued his inspection, opening the wardrobe to reveal a row of modest dresses, their colors muted but elegant. A blue silk shawl, matching the thread found on the cliff path, hung neatly on a hook. Poirot examined it, noting its pristine condition. No tears, no stains, he said. If she wore this shawl to the cliffs, it was not caught in the gorse. The thread, it may belong to another. Hastings frowned. Another shawl. Or someone else's. Poirot's lips curved. Precisely, Hastings. The clues, they multiply, but they do not yet align. He moved to the embroidery hoop, lifting it to the light. The rose was meticulously stitched, but a single thread hung. Loose, as if the work had been abandoned abruptly. She was interrupted, Poirot said, his voice low. Something or someone drew her from this task. Mrs. Hawthorne wrung her hands. She loved her embroidery. It calmed her. I can't imagine what would make her leave it unfinished. Poirot set the hoop down, his mind cataloguing every detail: the letter, the shawl, the embroidery, the lavender scent. He turned to the window, which overlooked the garden and, beyond it, the cliff path. The view was serene, yet it held a quiet menace, as if the landscape itself were complicit in the mystery. This room, he said, it is a portrait of Mademoiselle. Lillian, orderly, thoughtful, yet troubled. We must look beyond its surface. He requested to speak with Sylvia Trent again, sensing her guarded responses held more than she had revealed. They found her in the drawing room, sketching a portrait of the sea, her strokes sharp and restless. Mademoiselle Poirot began, his tone disarming. You told me Lillian was distant, preoccupied. Did she ever mention a plan to go to London? Sylvia's hand froze, her pencil hovering over the paper. London? No. She never said anything about that. Why? Poirot held up the letter, watching her reaction. This was found in her diary. A plea from Lieutenant Norton to meet him. You knew nothing of this. Sylvia's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, shaking her head. She didn't tell me. Lillian was secretive sometimes. I thought it was just nerves about the wedding. Poirot's gaze was piercing, and yet you sensed her unrest. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you see her with this letter, or with any other papers, that day? Sylvia's fingers tightened on her pencil. No, I saw her in the garden, after her argument. With Edward? She was holding something, a piece of paper. Maybe, but I didn't ask what it was. Poirot nodded, his mind noting the detail. Merci, mademoiselle. Your eyes, they see much, even if your words are few. As they left the drawing room, Hastings whispered, She's hiding something, Poirot. Did you see how she reacted to the letter? Poirot's lips curved. Indeed, mon ami. The truth, it is like a shadow, it moves when you approach. But we shall catch it. They sought out Edward Hawthorne next, finding him in his study, a cluttered room filled with legal documents and ledgers. He looked up, his expression wary. "Monsieur Hawthorne," Poirot said, holding up the letter. "Did you know of this correspondence between your cousin and Lieutenant Norton?" Edward's face darkened. "No, she never mentioned it. If she was planning to run off, she kept it well hidden." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And if she had confided in you, what would you have done?" Edward's hands clenched. "I'd have stopped her. Norton's no good for her. But I didn't know, I swear." Poirot dismissed him, his mind turning to the letter's implications. A plan to flee, a family's disapproval, a secret kept each was a piece of the puzzle, but the edges did not yet fit. As the afternoon waned, he felt the weight of the mystery deepen, the shadows of Ravencliff Hall growing longer with each unanswered question. Chapter 6. The journalist's motive. The evening settled over Ravencliff Hall with a heavy stillness, the kind that follows a storm, when the air feels charged with secrets yet to be spoken. The lamps in the drawing room cast a warm glow, but their light did little to dispel the chill of suspicion that hung over the household. Hercule Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly over his cane, observed the assembled company with the keenness of a hawk. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, missed nothing the flicker of a glance, the tightening of a jaw, the restless tap of a foot. Each gesture was a note in the symphony of human behavior, and Poirot was its conductor, seeking the discordant strain that would lead him to the truth. Captain Hastings, standing by the mantel, shifted uncomfortably, his honest face reflecting his unease. "This place is getting to me, Poirot," he whispered, glancing at the others. "Everyone's hiding something, I'd wager. That Marsh fellow, especially, too smooth by half." Poirot's moustache quivered, a subtle sign of his agreement. "Indeed, mon ami, Monsieur Marsh, he wears his charm like a mask, but masks, they slip. Let us see what lies beneath." He rose, his movements graceful yet purposeful, and approached Julian Marsh, who sat at a small writing desk, his notebook open, his pen scratching notes with an air of studied nonchalance. "Monsieur Marsh," Poirot began, his voice smooth as polished silver, "you have told me you are here to document the history of Ravencliff Hall. Yet a journalist, he is drawn to the drama of the present as much as the tales of the past. Nan, what interest do you have in Mademoiselle Lillian's disappearance?" Marsh looked up, his smile easy but his eyes cautious. "A tragedy like this, it's bound to catch anyone's attention, Monsieur Poirot. I'm just an observer, trying to piece together the story for my article. Lillian seemed like a sweet girl, quiet but kind. I didn't know her well." Poirot's gaze was piercing. "And yet you spoke with her, you said, about the house's architecture. Did she share anything, any hint of her plans, her fears?" Marsh leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "Nothing specific. She was polite, answered my questions about the hall's history, but she was distracted, kept glancing out the window like she was expecting someone. I didn't press her. She seemed fragile." Poirot's pen tapped his notebook, a rhythmic counterpoint to his thoughts. "Fragile, you say? And where were you, monsieur, when Mademoiselle Lillian left for the cliff path at dusk?" Marsh's smile didn't waver, but his fingers paused. "In the library, as I told you, making notes on some old maps of the estate. I didn't see her go out, but I heard Mrs. Hawthorne's alarm when she didn't return." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Your notes, they must be most detailed. Perhaps you will allow me to see them." Marsh hesitated, then shrugged. They're just research dates, architectural details, local legends. Nothing that would help with Lillian, I'm afraid. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. We shall see, monsieur. The smallest detail, it can be the key to a locked door. As Marsh returned to his writing, Poirot turned to Hastings, his voice low. He is clever, this one. He answers without answering, observes without revealing. We must learn more of his purpose. Determined to probe deeper, Poirot discreetly dispatched a telegram to a contact in London, a former colleague at Scotland Yard who could verify Marsh's credentials. The response, received later that evening, was illuminating. Julian Marsh was indeed a journalist, but his current assignment was not merely historical. He was investigating Edward Hawthorne's financial dealings, suspected of irregularities that could tarnish the family's reputation. The revelation cast Marsh's presence in a new light, and Poirot resolved to confront him. He found Marsh in the library, surrounded by maps and books, his pen moving swiftly across his notebook. Monsieur Marsh, Poirot said, closing the door behind him, you have not been entirely candid. Your interest in Ravencliff extends beyond its stone and mortar. You are here to investigate Monsieur Edward Hawthorne. Marsh's pen stopped, his smile fading. You've been busy, Monsieur Poirot, he said, his tone guarded but not hostile. All right, I'll level with you. My editor got a tip that Edward's been mismanaging client funds. Nothing proven, just rumors. I thought Lillian might know something, being close to him. I followed her that day, hoping to catch a moment to talk. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You followed her to the cliff path. Marsh nodded, his expression grim. I saw her leave the garden after her row with Edward. I trailed her to the cliff path, keeping my distance. She was upset, moving fast. I called out, but she didn't hear me or didn't want to. She disappeared around the bend, and I didn't follow. It was getting dark, and I figured she needed space. Poirot's mustache twitched. And you did not think to mention this before? Marsh shrugged, a hint of defiance in his eyes. I didn't want to make trouble. I'm not here to cause a scandal, just to get the truth. When she didn't come back, I thought she'd slipped or something. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. Or something, monsieur. What do you suspect? Marsh's jaw tightened. I don't know, but Edward's not telling everything. That argument wasn't just about her engagement. I overheard bits of it in the garden. She was accusing him of something serious. I couldn't catch it all, but she was furious. Poirot made a mental note, his mind racing. And you, monsieur, you returned to the house after this? Yes, Marsh said. I went back to the library. Mrs. Wren can confirm she saw me there. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, his thoughts a whirl of new possibilities. The journalist's motive was clearer. Now a quest for a story, perhaps at the expense of the family's secrets. But had his pursuit pushed Lillian to a desperate act, or had it merely placed him at the wrong place at the wrong time? He sought out Mrs. Wren to verify Marsh's alibi. She was in the kitchen, kneading dough with a vigor that suggested she was working out her anxieties. Madame Wren, Poirot said, his tone soothing. Monsieur Marsh claims he was in the library at dusk. Did you see him there? Mrs. Wren's hands paused, flour dusting her apron. I did, sir, she said, her voice low. I took him a tray of tea around 6. He was at the table, writing, stayed there until we realized Miss Lillian was gone. Poirot nodded, but his eyes lingered on her. And you saw nothing else? One else near the library or the garden at that hour? Mrs. Wren shook her head, but her fingers trembled slightly. No, sir. I was busy with dinner preparations. The house was quiet. Poirot thanked her, noting the slight quiver in her voice. She was loyal to the family, but loyalty, he knew, could mask deception. He returned to the drawing room, where Hastings awaited, eager for news. Well, Poirot, did Marsh spill the beans? Poirot's lips curved. He has spilled a few, mon ami, but not all. He followed Lillian, heard her argue with Edward about more than her engagement. There is a secret here, one that may have driven her to the cliffs. Hastings frowned. You think Edward's involved? He's a bit stiff, but he doesn't strike me as a villain. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Villains, Hastings, they wear many faces. We must look deeper into the argument, into the secrets of this house. The journalist, he seeks a story, but perhaps he has stumbled upon a truth more dangerous than he knows. As the evening deepened, Poirot felt the threads of the mystery tightening. The letter from Norton, the footprints, the thread, the argument overheard. Each was a piece, but the puzzle was far from complete. Ravencliff Hall, with its shadows and silences, was a labyrinth, and Poirot was determined to navigate its twists, to find Lillian Carver, the truth of what had befallen her. Chapter 7. The Professor's tale. The night had draped Ravencliff Hall in a cloak of darkness, broken only by the flickering lamps that cast long, wavering shadows across the stone walls. The sea's restless murmur seeped through the windows, a constant reminder of the cliffs where Lillian Carver had vanished. Hercule Poirot, seated in the library, his hands resting lightly on the arms of a leather chair, was a picture of calm intensity. His green eyes, sharp as ever, gleamed in the lamplight, and his moustache, meticulously groomed, betrayed a faint quiver as he pondered the threads of the mystery before him. The letter from Lieutenant Norton, the footprints on the cliff path, the blue silk thread, the lavender-scented handkerchief, and the overheard argument between Lillian and Edward all were fragments. Yet the whole remained tantalizingly out of reach. Captain Hastings paced before the fire, his restlessness a stark contrast to Poirot's stillness. This case is like trying to grab fog, Poirot, he said, running a hand through his hair. Every clue seems to lead to another question. That Marsh fellow, do you believe his story about following Lillian? Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. Monsieur Marsh, he tells a truth, but not the whole truth, mon ami. His pursuit of a story is clear, but his role in the drama writ is yet to be defined. We must now turn to another player in this game, Professor Eldridge. He rose, his cane tapping softly on the polished floor. His tales of legends, they intrigue me. Let us see if they conceal more than they reveal. They found Professor Marcus Eldridge in the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with potted ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. He was hunched over a table, his tweed jacket rumpled, his glasses perched precariously as he sketched a crude map of the cliffs. A lantern cast a warm glow over his work, illuminating lines that traced old paths and caves. He looked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, his eyes bright with the fervour of a man consumed by his passion. Monsieur Eldridge. Poirot began, his voice smooth yet commanding. You have spoken much of the Dusk Wraith and the legends of these cliffs. You told Mademoiselle Lillian of smugglers' caves. Tell me more of these hidden places. Eldridge adjusted his glasses, his enthusiasm undimmed by the late hour. The cliffs around Ravencliff are riddled with them, he said, pointing To his map, old smugglers' haunts, used centuries ago to hide contraband. Most are collapsed or flooded now, but a few remain accessibly. You know where to look. I told Lillian they were dangerous, but she was curious, always asking about the history of this place. Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying the map. And you, monsieur, have you explored these caves yourself? Eldridge hesitated, his pencil pausing. Not recently, he said. I'm an archaeologist, not a cave diver. My interest is in the standing stones, the ancient markers. But I did find one cave last week, just below the cliff path. I meant to report it to Mrs. Hawthorne. It's unstable, could be a hazard. Poirot's moustache twitched. This cave, it is near where Mademoiselle Lillian vanished. Eldridge nodded, pointing to a spot on the map, just below the outcrop, where the path curves. There's a narrow trail down to it, hidden by gorse. I found it by chance, while sketching. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings, recalling the lavender-scented handkerchief they had found in a similar cave. And you did not think to mention this cave earlier, when we spoke of her disappearance? Eldridge flushed, his fingers fidgeting with his pencil. I didn't think it relevant. It's just an old smuggler's hideout. I didn't imagine Lillian would go near it. She was sensible, not reckless. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Sensible, yet she walked the cliffs at dusk. Tell me, monsieur, what was your impression of her state of mind in the days before she vanished? Eldridge leaned back, his brow furrowing. She was quieter than usual, I'd say thoughtful. She asked me about the caves, but also about the old paths. Said she liked to imagine the smugglers sneaking through the night. I thought it was just a young woman's fancy, nothing more. Poirot made a mental note, his mind turning to the possibility of Lillian seeking out such a place. And you, where were you at dusk on the evening she disappeared? Eldridge gestured to his map, in the garden, as I told you, sketching those stones. I was there until Mrs. Wren called us for dinner. I didn't see Lillian or anyone else on the cliff path. Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on the professor's map. Merci. Monsieur, your knowledge of this place, it is most illuminating. May I borrow this map? Eldridge hesitated, then handed it over. It's just a rough sketch, but you're welcome to it. Poirot folded the map carefully, tucking it into his pocket. The rough sketch, it can reveal as much as the finest painting if one knows how to look. Determined to verify Eldridge's claims, Poirot and Hastings set out for the cliffs at first light, the professor's map in hand. The morning was crisp, the air sharp with salt, and the path was slick with dew. They followed the trail to the outcrop, where the narrow descent to the cave was barely visible, concealed by dense gorse. Poirot navigated the steep path with care, his cane steadying his steps, while Hastings followed, muttering about the perils of such a place. The cave's mouth was a jagged gash in the cliff, its interior cool and damp, echoing with the distant drip of water. Poirot's torch swept the walls, revealing rough-hewn stone and patches of seaweed. The faint scent of lavender lingered, stronger here than in the cave they had explored previously, confirming they were in the right place. In a shadowed corner, Poirot spotted something new, a small, tarnished locket, half buried in the sand. He knelt, extracting it with a gloved hand, and opened it to reveal a miniature portrait of a young man. Unmistakably Lieutenant Norton. Hastings, regarders. Poirot exclaimed, holding up the locket. This is no coincidence. Mademoiselle Lillian was here, or someone wishes us to believe she was. Hastings peered at the locket, his face grim. "Norton's picture. Do you think she dropped it, or was it planted?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, mon ami, is the question. The handkerchief, the locket, both point to Lillian, yet both could be placed to mislead. We must tread carefully." They searched the cave further, finding a faint scrape on the wall, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. The mark was fresh, its edges unweathered, suggesting recent activity. Poirot traced it with his finger, his mind racing. "Something or someone was moved here," he said softly. "But by whom and why?" Back at the house, Poirot sought out Mrs. Hawthorne to inquire about the locket. She confirmed it was Lillian's, a gift from Norton, worn often but not always. She cherished it, Mrs. Hawthorne said, her voice breaking. If it was in the cave, she must have been there. Poirot's expression was grave. "Madame, it confirms her presence, but not her fate. We must learn who else knew of this cave." He questioned Sylvia Trent next, finding her in the garden, pruning roses with a distracted air. "Mademoiselle Poirot said, holding up the locket, this was found in a cave Professor Eldridge described. Did Lillian ever speak of such a place to you?" Sylvia's shears paused, her eyes widening. "A cave? No, she never mentioned it. She liked the cliffs, but caves, that's not like her." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying unease. Poirot's gaze was relentless, and yet her locket was there. "Did you ever walk the cliffs with her? Perhaps see her near such a place?" Sylvia shook her head, her lips tight. "No, I stayed in the garden or my studio. Lillian went off alone that day." Poirot dismissed her, noting her tension. He then sought Edward Hawthorne, who was in the stables, inspecting a horse with a distracted air. "Monsieur Hawthorne," Poirot said, producing the locket, "this was found in a cave below the cliff path. Did you know of such a place?" Edward's face paled, his hands tightening on the reins. "A cave? No, I don't wander the cliffs. Lillian never mentioned anything like that to me." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, you argued with her. That day, could she have sought such a place to escape your disapproval?" Edward's jaw clenched. "If she did, she didn't tell me. I only wanted her to be safe, not this." Poirot thanked him, his mind cataloguing the locket, the scrape, the professor's map. The cave was a new piece in the puzzle, suggesting a hidden purpose, refuge, rendezvous, or something darker. He returned to the library, spreading the map on the table, tracing the paths with his finger. "The cave, it is a stage, Hastings," he said. "But who played the roles within it?" Hastings frowned. "You think Lillian went there to meet someone? Norton, maybe." Poirot's lips curved. "Or to hide from someone. The professor's tale, it opens a door, but to what truth, we do not yet know." As the day waned, Poirot felt the mystery deepen. The cave's secrets whispering of possibilities, flight, foul play, or deception. Ravencliff Hall's shadows were growing longer, and Poirot knew the next clue would require all his ingenuity to uncover. Chapter 8. The Housekeeper's Fear. The dawn broke over Ravencliff Hall with a reluctant light, as if the sun itself hesitated to pierce the veil of secrets shrouding the estate. The cliffs stood sentinel against the restless sea, their jagged edges softened by a lingering mist that curled like a whisper around the stone walls. Hercule Poirot, already awake and dressed with his customary precision, stood at his window, his green eyes scanning the horizon. His mustache, a perfect curve, quivered faintly as he reflected on the mounting clues, the locket in the cave, the professor's map, the letter from Norton, and the undercurrents of tension among the household. Each was a piece of the puzzle. Yet the picture remained tantalizingly incomplete. Captain Hastings joined him in the dining room, where a subdued breakfast was laid out: porridge, toast, and a pot of strong tea, served with an air of quiet urgency by Mrs. Dorothy Wren. Hastings, ever the optimist, helped himself to a generous portion, but his brow furrowed as he glanced at Poirot. "You look like you've been up all night, old chap," he said, spreading jam on his toast. "That locket's got you thinking, hasn't it? Do you reckon Lillian's hiding in that cave?" Poirot sipped his caf au lait, his expression serene but alert. "Hiding, mon ami, or hidden. The cave speaks of presence, but not of purpose. We must now turn our attention to one who sees much, yet says little. Madame Wren, the housekeeper." He set down his cup, his gaze drifting to the door where Mrs. Wren had just disappeared with an empty tray. Her loyalty to this family, it is a shield, but perhaps also a mask. Breakfast passed in near silence, the household subdued by the weight of Lillian's absence. Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Edward Hawthorne stared at his plate, his fork untouched, while Sylvia Trent toyed with a pencil, sketching absent-mindedly on a napkin. Professor Eldridge muttered to himself, flipping through a notebook, and Julian Marsh, ever observant, watched. The others with a journalist's keen eye. Poirot noted their behaviors, each gesture a thread in the tapestry of suspicion he was weaving. As the meal concluded, Poirot requested a private word with Mrs. Wren. He found her in the kitchen, a cavernous room of gleaming copper pots and the sharp scent of herbs. She was scrubbing a counter with fierce determination, her grey-streaked hair escaping its tight bun. "Madame Wren," Poirot began, his voice gentle but insistent, "you have served this family for many years. You are the eyes and ears of Ravencliff Hall. Tell me, what did you see on the day Mademoiselle Lillian vanished?" Mrs. Wren's hands paused, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the cloth. "I've told you, sir," she said, her voice low and strained. "I saw Miss Lillian leave for the cliff path at dusk. She said she needed air. She looked troubled, but I didn't press her." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the faint tremor in her voice. "Troubled, you say, and yet you did not follow, did not ask further. A loyal housekeeper, she notices such things. Nan." Mrs. Wren's lips pressed into a thin line. "I had my duties, sir. Dinner to prepare, the house to manage. I thought she'd be back soon enough." Poirot leaned forward, his cane resting lightly against the counter. "And after she left, what then? Did you see anyone else, perhaps near the garden, the cliffs, or the library where Monsieur Marsh claims he was?" Mrs. Wren's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting an interruption. "No, sir. I was in here, mostly. I took tea to Mr. Marsh in the library, as he said, but that's all. The house was quiet until we realized she was gone." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Quiet, yet not empty. Tell me, madame, did you overhear anything that day, any conversation, any hint that might explain Mademoiselle Lillian's actions?" Mrs. Wren hesitated, her hands twisting the cloth. I don't like to speak out of turn, sir, but I did hear Miss Lillian and Mr. Edward in the garden, as I told you. She was crying, saying he had no right to judge her. I thought it was about her engagement, but she trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. "But," Poirot prompted, his voice soft but relentless, Mrs. Wren swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. It sounded like more than that. She said something about secrets he couldn't keep buried. I didn't catch it. Ali was passing by with the laundry. I didn't think it mattered until she didn't come back. Poirot's eyes gleamed, the revelation a spark in the darkness of the mystery. Secrets, madame. And you did not think to mention this before. Mrs. Wren's face flushed, her hands trembling. I didn't want to cause trouble for Mr. Edward. He's a good man, sir, just protective. I thought it was a family matter, nothing to do with whatever happened to her. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Mercy. Madame, your loyalty, it is admirable, but the truth, it requires candor. If you recall anything else, you will tell me. Oui. Mrs. Wren nodded, her eyes downcast, and Poirot dismissed her with a polite bow. As she returned to her work, he turned to Hastings, who had been listening intently. Secrets he couldn't keep buried, Poirot repeated softly. A most intriguing phrase, mon ami. We must press Monsieur Edward further. They sought Edward in his study, a room cluttered with legal papers and the faint scent of ink. He was sorting documents, his movements mechanical, his face etched with strain. Monsieur Hawthorne, Poirot said, closing the door behind them, Madame Wren has shared a curious detail. During your argument with Mademoiselle Lillian, she spoke of secrets you couldn't keep buried. What did she mean, Edward's hands froze, a letter slipping from his grasp. I don't know what she's talking about, he said, his voice tight. Lillian was upset about my objections to Norton. She said I was hiding my own faults, judging her when I had no right. It was just her temper talking. Poirot's gaze was piercing, and yet her words suggest something deeper. A secret. Perhaps that threatened you or the family. What was it, monsieur? Edward's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with defiance. There's no secret, Monsieur Poirot. Lillian was emotional, that's all. She didn't mean anything by it. Poirot leaned forward, his voice low. Monsieur, the truth is like a tide, it will come in, whether you wish it or not. If you know something, it is better to speak now. Edward stood, his hands clenched. I've told you all I know. If Lillian's gone, it's because of Norton, not me. Poirot dismissed him, his mind cataloguing the denial, the anger, the fear in Edward's eyes. He turned to Hastings, who was shaking his head. He's hiding something, Poirot. Hastings said. That secret's bit, it's got to mean something big. Poirot's lips curved. Indeed, mon ami. But what? A family scandal, a financial misstep, or something darker? We must keep watch. Later that morning, Poirot and Hastings returned to the garden, seeking further clues where Lillian and Edward had argued. The rose arbor was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of damp petals. Poirot knelt, examining the ground where the heel mark had been found. Nearby, he spotted a small, overlooked detailer, single cigarette butt, its paper slightly charred, half hidden under a rose bush. Curious, Poirot murmured, picking it up with a gloved hand. A cigarette in a garden where no one claims to smoke. Who left this, I wonder? Hastings frowned. None of them mentioned smoking. Could it be an outsider? Poirot's eyes gleamed, or someone who does not wish to be seen as they are. We shall inquire. They returned to the house, where Poirot questioned Mrs. Hawthorne about the household's habits. Madame, he said, holding up the cigarette butt, does anyone here smoke? Mrs. Hawthorne shook her head. Not that I know of. Edward dislikes it, and Lillian never touched cigarettes. Sylvia might, but I've never seen her. Poirot nodded, pocketing the evidence. The cigarette, the housekeeper's fear, Edward's denial, all were new threads in the mystery. As the morning progressed, Poirot felt the weight of Raven secrets pressing closer, each clue a step toward the truth, but the path was still shrouded in shadow. Chapter Jill, the fiancé's arrival. The morning at Ravencliff Hall was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. The cliffs outside glistening under a reluctant sun that broke through the clouds in fitful bursts. The atmosphere within the mansion was no less oppressive, each room seeming to hold its breath, waiting for the next revelation in the mystery of Lillian Carver's disappearance. Hercule Poirot, his attire as immaculate as ever, stood in the drawing room, his cane resting lightly. In his hand, his green eyes scanning the space with a quiet intensity. The cigarette butt, the housekeeper's whispered words about buried secrets. The locket in the cave wall were threads in a tapestry that was beginning to take shape, though its pattern remained elusive. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, leaned against the mantel, his face a mixture of excitement and unease. "That cigarette butt's a queer find, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "No one in the house admits to smoking, yet there it was. Do you think it's an outsider, or is someone lying?" Poirot's moustache quivered, a subtle sign of his mind at work. Lying, mon ami, or hiding, both are possible. The cigarette, it is a small thing, yet it speaks of carelessness in a place where all else is calculated. We must seek the hand. That dropped it. He turned his attention to the window, where the cliffs loomed in the distance, their jagged edges a stark reminder of Lillian's vanishing. The household was gathered for a late breakfast, the clink of cutlery against china the only sound in the strained silence. Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, her face pale but composed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Edward Hawthorne stared at his coffee, his expression unreadable, while Sylvia Trent sketched idly on a napkin, her pencil strokes sharp and restless. Professor Eldridge pored over a book of local history, muttering to himself, and Julian Marsh, the journalist, watched the others with a practiced air of detachment. Mrs. Dorothy Wren moved silently, refilling teacups with a deference that bordered on wariness. The tension was shattered by a commotion at the front door, a loud knock, followed by the butler's hurried footsteps. Moments later, a young man strode into the dining room, his naval uniform crisp despite the evident strain of travel. His face was handsome but haggard, his dark eyes wild with worry. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Where's Lillian?" Mrs. Hawthorne rose, her hands trembling. "Lieutenant Norton, you've come, oh. Thank God, but we don't know. Lillian's gone, vanished." Poirot stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Monsieur Lieutenant James Norton, I presume," he said, his voice smooth but authoritative. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are investigating the disappearance of Mademoiselle Lillian. Your arrival, it is most timely." Norton's gaze darted around the room, taking in the faces of the household. "I got a telegram from Amelia Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, his voice breaking. "I came as soon as I could. What's happened to her? Someone tell me." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Please, monsieur, sit. Tell us what you know, and we shall share what we have learned. But first, when did you last hear?" "From Mademoiselle Lillian." Norton sank into the chair, his hands clenched. "I wrote to her a few days ago, begging her to meet me in London. She didn't reply, But that's not unusual. She's careful about letters, with Edward always hovering. I thought she was just busy, but then I got the telegram saying she was gone. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Edward. You didn't approve of us, did you? Did you do something to her? Edward's face flushed, his hands gripping the table. That's absurd. I only wanted her to be careful. I'd never harm her. Poirot raised a hand, his voice cutting through the rising tension. Monsieur Norton, accusations, they cloud. The truth, let us speak of facts. Your letter, which we found in Mademoiselle Lillian's diary, urged her to come to London. Yet she did not. Why, do you think? Norton's shoulders slumped, his anger giving way to despair. I don't know. She was worried about something. Her letters hinted at it, but she wouldn't say what. I thought it was just family pressure, Edward's meddling. I told her we could elope, start fresh, but she said she needed time. Poirot's eyes gleamed, noting the confirmation of the letter's contents. And when did you arrive in Cornwall, monsieur? Norton hesitated, his fingers tightening on his cap. Yesterday morning. I couldn't wait any longer. Had to see her. I sent a note, asking her to meet me at dusk, near the cliffs. I waited, but she never came. Poirot's mustache twitched. You were here, in Cornwall, at the time of her disappearance. This is most significant. Where, precisely, did you wait? Norton's face paled. Near the old oak by the cliff path. I stayed. Out of sight. I didn't want the family to know I was here. When she didn't show, I thought she'd changed her mind. I went back to my inn in the village. Poirot's gaze was piercing. And you saw no one else? No one on the path, in the garden? Norton shook his head, but Poirot noticed a faint bruise on his wrist, partially hidden by his cuff. Monsieur Poirot said, his voice soft but relentless, that mark on your wrist, it is recent, Nan. How did you come by it? Norton glanced at his wrist, pulling his sleeve down. It's nothing. I caught it on a fence while walking back to the village. It was dark. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Merci, monsieur. Your candor, it is appreciated. We shall speak again. As Norton was shown to a guest room to rest, Poirot turned to Hastings, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Good Lord, Poirot. He was here, at the cliffs, when Lillian vanished. And that bruise looks suspicious, doesn't it? Poirot's lips curved. Suspicious, yes, but not conclusive. Monsieur Norton, he loves her, but love can drive a man to desperate acts. Or perhaps he is merely a pawn in a larger game. We must verify his story. Poirot requested to see the oak tree Norton had mentioned, and Mrs. Hawthorne led them to the garden, where a gnarled ancient oak stood near the cliff path's entrance. The ground beneath was soft from recent rain, and Poirot's keen eyes spotted a cluster of cigarette butts, similar to the one found in the rose arbor, scattered near the roots. Aha, he murmured, collecting them with a gloved hand. Our smoker was here, too. Perhaps watching, perhaps waiting. Hastings frowned. Norton didn't mention smoking. Could it be someone else? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Or he omits a habit, as others omit truths. We shall see, they questioned. Sylvia next, finding her in her studio, her hands stained with paint as she worked on a stormy seascape. Mademoiselle Poirot said, holding up one of the cigarette butts. You told us you do not smoke, yet these were found near the oak where Lieutenant Norton waited. Did you see anyone there at dusk? Sylvia's brush paused, her eyes flickering. With unease. No, I was in here, painting. I didn't go near the cliffs that evening. Poirot's gaze was relentless. And yet, you saw Lillian in the garden earlier. Did you notice anyone else, perhaps someone who does not belong? Sylvia shook her head, her lips tight. No one. The garden was empty, except for Lillian and Edward arguing. Poirot dismissed her, noting her tension. He then sought Mrs. Wren, who was polishing silver in the pantry. "Madame," he said, showing her the cigarette butts. "These were found near the oak. Do you know anyone in the household who smokes, despite their claims otherwise?" Mrs. Wren's hands froze, her eyes darting to the door. "No, sir. I've never seen anyone smoke here. Not Mr. Edward, not Miss Sylvia, not even the professor." Poirot nodded, pocketing the evidence. The fiancé's arrival, the cigarette butts, the bruisal were new pieces in the puzzle, each pointing to a moment of confrontation or concealment. At dusk, as the day wore on, Poirot felt the mystery tightening, the threads of truth drawing closer. But the heart of Ravencliff's secrets remained just out of reach. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The twilight at Ravencliff Hall was a somber affair. The sky bruised with clouds that seemed to mirror the gathering tension within the mansion's walls. The sea's ceaseless murmur was a low undertone, as if whispering secrets that only the cliffs could understand. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, his silhouette framed against the tall windows, his hands clasped behind his back. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, reflected a mind at work, weaving together the threads of the mystery Lieutenant Norton's unexpected arrival. The cigarette butts near the oak, the bruise on his wrist, and the housekeeper's cryptic mention of buried secrets. Each clue was a note in a complex melody, and Poirot was determined to conduct it to its conclusion. Captain Hastings, seated at the oak table, fidgeted with a paperweight, his face alight with anticipation. "Norton's story shakes things up, doesn't it, Poirot?" he said, his voice low but eager. "He was right there at the cliffs when Lillian vanished. And those cigarette butts, do you think he's our man?" Poirot's moustache quivered, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Monsieur Norton, he is a piece of the puzzle, mon ami, but whether he is the key or a distraction, we shall soon see. The truth, it is like a shy bird, it requires a trap to be caught." He turned, his cane tapping softly on the floor. "Tonight we shall set such a trap." Hastings leaned forward, his eyes wide. "A trap? What's the plan, old chap?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Patience, Hastings. We shall gather the household and plant a seed of small deception, to stir the waters. The guilty, they will react, and in their reaction, the truth will reveal itself." At dinner, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken questions, the clink of silverware a stark contrast to the strained silence. Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne sat at the head of the table, her face etched with worry, her hands clasped tightly round her. Napkin. Edward Hawthorne stared at his plate, his jaw tight, while Sylvia Trent toyed with her fork, her eyes darting to Lieutenant Norton, who sat with a grim determination. Professor Eldridge muttered over a notebook, his glasses slipping down his nose, and Julian Marsh, the journalist, watched the others with a calculated air of detachment. Mrs. Dorothy Wren moved silently, serving the meal with a deference that masked her unease. Poirot rose, his presence commanding the room's attention. "Madame, et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate. "I have made a significant discovery in the case of Mademoiselle Lillian's disappearance. In her room, I found a hidden note, not unlike the letter from Monsieur Norton, but more revealing. It suggests that Mademoiselle Lillian intended to confront someone about a grave secreta, secret that threatened the harmony of this household. Tonight, I shall place this note in the library, under lock and key, to study it further. Tomorrow, we shall discuss its contents." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Mrs. Hawthorne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A note. "What did it say, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "That, Madame, I shall reveal tomorrow, when I have confirmed its meaning. For now, it is safe, and Hercule Poirot guards it closely." Edward's face paled, his fingers tightening on his glass. Sylvia's fork clattered to her plate, her eyes wide with surprise. Norton's gaze darted to Poirot, a flicker of alarm crossing his features. Eldridge paused in his muttering, his glasses glinting, while Marsh's pen hovered over his notebook, his smile thin. Mrs. Wren, clearing a dish, froze for a moment, her hands trembling. Hastings, catching Poirot's eye, raised an eyebrow. "A note, Poirot. You didn't mention Poirot," silenced him with a subtle gesture, his expression serene. "All in good time, mon ami. Let us retire for the evening." In truth, there was no new note. Poirot had fabricated the story to provoke a reaction. He and Hastings retreated to the library, where Poirot placed a blank sheet of paper, folded to resemble a letter, inside a locked drawer. He then concealed himself behind a heavy curtain, motioning for Hastings to take a position near the door. "We watch, mon ami," he whispered. "The guilty, they will come to see this note, to protect their secret." The hours crept by, the house settling into an uneasy silence, broken only by the distant crash of waves. At midnight, a soft creak echoed through the library, and Poirot's senses sharpened. A figure slipped through the door, moving with cautious steps toward the desk. The faint glow of a candle revealed Edward Hawthorne, his face taut with anxiety. He fumbled with the drawer, his hands shaking as he tried to pick the lock with a small tool. Poirot stepped from the shadows, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Monsieur Hawthorne, you are most interested in my discovery, Nan. Why do you seek this note?" Edward froze, the tool clattering to the floor. I wasn't," he stammered, his face ashen. "I just wanted to know what Lillian wrote. If it's about me, I have a right to know." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A right, perhaps, but such secrecy suggests guilt. Tell me, monsieur, what secret did Mademoiselle Lillian threaten to expose?" Edward's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. "She found out about a mistake I made. Some investments went wrong, client funds misplaced. I was trying to fix it, but she overheard me talking to a colleague. She said she'd tell Aunt Amelia if I didn't stop interfering with her engagement. I begged her to keep quiet, but she was furious. That's what we argued about in the garden." Poirot's mustache twitched. "And at dusk, when she went to the cliff path, did you follow her?" Edward shook his head, his eyes desperate. "No, I swear. I went to my study to think. I didn't see her after the argument." Poirot studied him, noting the sincerity in his voice, but also the fear. "Mercy, monsieur. Return to your room, but know that Hercule Poirot sees all." As Edward left, Hastings emerged from his hiding place, his eyes wide. "Good Lord, Poirot. He's been hiding a financial scandal. Do you think he did something to Lillian to keep her quiet?" Poirot's lips curved. "Possible, mon ami, but not certain. His fear is real, but is it of discovery or of guilt? We must watch the others." They resumed their vigil, but no one else came that night. At dawn, Poirot retrieved the blank paper, his trap having served its purpose. He gathered the household in the drawing room, his presence commanding their attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said. The note was a ruse, a test, to see who would act. "Monsieur Edward, you sought to see it, revealing a secret about misplaced funds. But is this the only secret in Ravencliff Hall?" Edward flushed, his hands clenched, while the others exchanged uneasy glances. Sylvia's eyes darted to Norton, who stared at the floor. Mrs. Wren's hands twisted in her apron, and Marsh's pen paused, his smile gone. Eldridge adjusted his glasses, his muttering silenced. Poirot continued, his voice steady. "Mademoiselle Lilian's disappearance. It is tied to secrets, but whose? I urge you, if you know more, speak now." No one spoke, the silence heavy with suspicion. Poirot dismissed them, his mind racing. The trap had revealed Edward's secret, but the cigarette butts, the locket, and Norton's presence at the cliffs still pointed to other hands at work. As the household dispersed, Poirot felt the mystery drawing closer to its heart, the truth lurking just beyond the next shadow. Chapter 11. The truth revealed. The morning light filtered through the heavy drapes of Ravencliff Hall, casting a pale, uncertain glow over the drawing room where Hercule Poirot had summoned the household. The air was thick with anticipation, the sea's distant roar a somber backdrop to the gathering tension. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his posture erect, his cane resting lightly in his hand, his green eyes scanning the assembled faces with a quiet intensity that commanded silence. His mustache, a perfect arc, quivered faintly as he prepared to unravel the mystery of Lilian Carver's disappearance. The trap he had set the previous night had exposed Edward's secret, but the locket, the cigarette butts, Norton's presence, and Mrs. Wren's whispered fears pointed to a deeper truth. One, Poirot, was now ready to reveal. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "This is it, isn't it, Poirot?" he whispered, leaning close. "You've got the whole thing figured out, haven't you?" Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "The little grey cells, mon ami, they have been busy. The truth, it is. Like a tapestry, each thread must be woven with care, but now the pattern is clear." He turned to the household, his voice clear and commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, the disappearance of Mademoiselle Lilian Carver has cast a shadow over Ravencliff Hall, but today Hercule Poirot shall bring light to that shadow." Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne sat at the edge of her chair, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes wide with hope and dread. Edward Hawthorne stood by the door, his face pale, his jaw set with defiance. Sylvia Trent perched on an armchair, her sketchbook closed, her fingers gripping its edges. Lieutenant James Norton sat rigid, his naval uniform crisp but his eyes haunted. Professor Marcus Eldridge fidgeted with his glasses, his notebook forgotten, while Julian Marsh, the journalist, watched with a keen, almost predatory interest. Mrs. Dorothy Wren hovered near the back, her apron twisted in her hands, her face a mask of anxiety. Poirot began, his voice steady and deliberate. "From the moment I arrived, I have observed the clues: the pearl earring on the cliff path, the blue silk thread, the lavender-scented handkerchief, the locket in the cave, the cigarette butts, the letter from Monsieur Norton, and the words overheard by Madame Wren. Each pointed to a story, but not the one it seemed. Let us begin with the earring." He held up the pearl earring, its surface catching the light. "This was found on the cliff path, suggesting Mademoiselle Lilian fell or was taken. Yet there was no sign of a struggle, no torn earth, no broken branches. The earring was placed, a deliberate clue to suggest tragedy. Mrs. Hawthorne gasped. Placed? By whom, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Patience, madame. Next, the thread of blue silk, caught in the gauze. It matched Mademoiselle Lillian's shawl, but the shawl in her room was untouched. This thread came from another source, meant to mislead. The handkerchief in the cave, scented with her lavender perfume, and the locket with Monsieur Norton's portrait, these two were placed to suggest her presence, yet they told a different story. He turned to Norton, whose hands clenched on his knees. Monsieur Norton, you arrived yesterday, claiming you waited for Mademoiselle Lillian at dusk by the oak tree. You bore a bruise on your wrist, which you said was from a fence, but I suspect it came from a struggle, not with Lillian, but with someone who knew of your plans. Norton's eyes widened, but he remained silent. Poirot continued, turning to Edward. Monsieur Hawthorne, you admitted to a financial indiscretion which Lillian threatened to expose. Your attempt to retrieve my false note last night confirmed your fear of discovery. But your secret, it was not the heart of this mystery. Edward's face flushed, but he said nothing. Poirot's gaze shifted to Sylvia. Mademoiselle Sylvia, you have been most guarded. Your sketches, your hesitations, your quick denials, they betray a deeper knowledge. It is you, I believe, who holds the key to this riddle. Sylvia's fingers tightened on her sketchbook, her face paling. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice trembling. Poirot's voice softened, but his eyes were relentless. You do, mademoiselle. Let me tell you the story as I see it. Mademoiselle Lillian was troubled, not just by her engagement, but by the pressure of this household. She argued with Monsieur Edward about his financial misdeeds, threatening to tell Madame Hawthorne. She received a letter from Monsieur Norton, urging her to elope, but she was torn. She confided in you, her cousin, her closest friend. Sylvia's eyes filled with tears, but she remained silent. Poirot pressed on. You, mademoiselle, devised a plan to help her. You hid her in the cave, the one Professor Eldridge told her about, to give her time to decide her future. The earring, the thread, the handkerchief, the locket, these were your doing. To make it seem she had vanished, perhaps fallen, to keep the family from searching too closely. Mrs. Hawthorne gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sylvia, is this true? Sylvia broke, her voice a sob. Yes, it's true. Lillian was desperate. Edward was pressuring her to break off with James, threatening to cut her off if she didn't. She found out about his dealings, money he'd misused from clients. She wanted to leave, but she was afraid. I told her about the cave, a place to hide while she decided what to do. I planted those clues to make it look like she'd gone over the cliff, so no one would look for her. Poirot nodded, his expression grave but compassionate. And the cigarette butts, mademoiselle? They were yours, were they not? Sylvia's shoulders slumped. Yes, I smoke sometimes, when I'm nervous. I didn't think anyone would notice. Poirot turned to Norton. Monsieur, you met Lillian at the cave, not the oak. The bruise on your wrist, it came from her, in a moment of fear when you tried to persuade her to leave. She refused, did she not? Norton nodded, his voice hoarse. She was scared, said she needed more time. I tried to grab her arm, to convince her, but she pulled away. I left her there, thinking she'd come to me later. Poirot's gaze swept. The room, Mademoiselle Lillian, is alive, hidden in the cave by Mademoiselle Sylvia to protect her from family pressure. The clues were a deception, but not of malice of love. Madame Wren, you suspected something when you overheard Lillian's words about buried secrets. but your loyalty to Monsieur Edward kept you silent. Monsieur Marsh, your pursuit of a story led you to follow Lillian, but you saw nothing of the truth. Mrs. Hawthorne rose, her voice trembling. Lillian's alive. Where is she now? Poirot gestured to Sylvia. Mademoiselle, take us to her. Sylvia led them to the cave, her steps heavy with guilt. Inside, Lillian sat on a makeshift bed of blankets, her face pale but unharmed. She rushed to Norton, tears streaming, as Mrs. Hawthorne embraced her, sobbing with relief. Poirot watched, his expression softening. The truth, it is found, but not without cost. Mademoiselle Lillian, you must decide your path now, with honesty. The household returned to Ravencliff. The weight of the mystery lifted, but replaced by the strain of revealed secrets. Edward's indiscretions would need addressing, but for now, Lillian's safety was enough. Chapter 12. The return to London. The morning sun broke over the Cornish cliffs with a serene clarity, its rays gilding the rugged stones of Ravencliff Hall and softening the stark lines of the landscape that had borne witness to Lillian Carver's mysterious disappearance. The sea, calmer now, whispered against the rocks below, as if relieved of the secrets it had guarded. Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall of the mansion, his suitcase packed with the precision of a man who valued order above all. His overcoat was folded neatly over his arm, his hat adjusted to a perfect angle, and his green eyes, bright with the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, surveyed the scene with a quiet triumph. His mustache, a masterpiece of symmetry, gave a faint quiver as he contemplated the human drama that had unfolded and been resolved within these walls. Captain Hastings, ever the faithful companion, stood beside him, his own bag slung carelessly over his shoulder, his honest face alight with admiration. "You've done it again, Poirot," he said, shaking his head with a grin. "Unravelled the whole tangle like it was a simple knot. Sylvia hiding Lillian, Edward's financial mess, those cigarette butts, it all makes sense now. How do you always see it so clearly?" Poirot's lips curved in a modest smile, his cane tapping softly on the polished floor. "It is not magic, mon ami, but method. The clous de pearl earring, the silk thread, the locket, the handkerchief, the cigarette butts, the bruise on Monsieur Norton's wrist, they are but the language of the heart, speaking of love, fear, and loyalty. The little grey cells, they listen, they arrange, and the truth, it shines forth." He adjusted his cufflinks with a deft movement, his voice softening. "But come, Hastings, the train to London awaits, and Hercule Poirot does not keep the schedule waiting." The household gathered in the hall to bid them farewell, their faces a mosaic of relief, gratitude, and lingering unease. Mrs. Amelia Hawthorne stood at the forefront, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes still shadowed by the ordeal but bright with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, clasping his hand warmly, "you have given us back our Lillian. I feared the worst, but your genius has restored our family. How can we ever repay you?" Poirot bowed slightly, his demeanor a blend of courtesy and restraint. "Madame, to restore harmony where chaos reigns, that is the reward of Hercule Poirot. But take care, secrets, they leave scars, and your family must now heal them." Lillian Carver stood beside her aunt, her arm entwined with Lieutenant James Norton's, her face pale but radiant with a quiet resolve. Her brown hair was neatly pinned, and her eyes, though tired, shone with determination. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I was wrong to hide, to cause such pain. I thought I could escape my troubles, but I only made them worse. Thank you for finding me." Poirot's gaze softened, his voice gentle. Mademoiselle, the heart, it seeks freedom, but truth is the only path to it. You have chosen wisely to return. Monsieur Norton, he is fortunate to have your trust. Norton, his naval uniform crisp, despite his evident exhaustion, nodded, his hand tightening on Lillian's. I'll take care of her, Monsieur Poirot. No more secrets, I promise. Poirot's eyes lingered on the faint bruise on Norton's wrist, a reminder of the struggle in the cave where Lillian had resisted his plea to elope. Monsieur, love is a powerful force, but it must be tempered with patience. See that you keep your word. Sylvia Trent stood a little apart, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her auburn hair glowing in the morning light. Her face was a mixture of relief and guilt, her eyes avoiding Edward's stern gaze. Mademoiselle Sylvia, Poirot said, his tone kind but firm, your act of hiding your cousin. It was born of love, but love must not cloak itself in deception. Your sketches, they saw the truth before you spoke it. Sylvia's lips trembled, but she managed a nod. I only wanted to protect her. I didn't think it would go this far. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused. Poirot's mustache twitched. The heart, it leads us astray, but it also leads us home. You have done well to confess, mademoiselle. Edward Hawthorne lingered near the staircase, his posture rigid, his face etched with the weight of his exposed financial indiscretions. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice low and strained, I know I've much to answer for. I'll make things right with my clients, I swear it. Lillian's safe, and that's what matters. Poirot's gaze was piercing but not unkind. Monsieur, the path to redemption is paved with action, not promises. Begin today, and the shadow of your mistake may yet fade. Professor Marcus Eldridge, his tweed jacket as rumpled as ever, adjusted his glasses with a sheepish smile. Your methods, Monsieur Poirot, make my old legends seem like child's tales. That cave he never thought it would hold the key to. All this Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Your knowledge, monsieur, it lit the path, even if you did not see its destination. The caves and cliffs, they spoke, and I listened. Julian Marsh, the journalist, stood at the edge of the group, his notebook tucked away, his usual charm subdued. You've given me a story I can't write, Monsieur Poirot, he said, his tone wry. The truth's too delicate for print, but I'll take the lesson back to London. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A wise choice, monsieur. The truth, it, is a treasure, not a headline. Guard it well. Mrs. Dorothy Wren hovered at the back, her apron smoothed, but her hands still twisting nervously. You saw through us all, sir, she said quietly. I kept quiet to protect Mr. Edward, but I see now that was wrong. Thank you for finding Miss Lillian. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, loyalty is a virtue, but truth is its master. Your silence, it is forgiven, for you spoke when it mattered. With farewells exchanged, Poirot and Hastings stepped into the waiting car, the gravel crunching under their feet as they left Ravencliff Hall behind. The drive to the station was quiet, the Cornish landscape unfolding in a blur of green moors and grey cliffs, the sea's murmur fading into the distance. At the station, they boarded the train to London, settling into a first-class compartment where Poirot could reflect in comfort, his hands folded neatly over his cane. As the train rattled through the countryside, Hastings leaned back, his eyes fixed on Poirot. What was the moment, Poirot? The one where it all clicked, the earring, the locket, Sylvia's deception. Poirot gazed out the window, the passing fields a canvas for his thoughts. It was the cigarette butts, mon ami," he said softly. They were Mademoiselle Sylvia's, a habit she hid, found where she watched and waited near the oak in the garden. Her sketches, too, they showed the cliffs, the cave, a place she knew well. But it was her guilt, Hastings, the love and fear in her eyes, that told me she acted to protect Lillian, not to harm her. Hastings grinned, shaking his head. "You're a marvel, Poirot. And Edward's financial mess, think he'll really sort it out?" Poirot's lips curved. "He will, or the law will compel him. But for now, Mademoiselle Lillian is safe, her love with Monsieur Norton secured. That is the victory of Hercule Poirot." The train sped on, carrying them back to the bustle of London, where new mysteries undoubtedly awaited. Ravencliff Hall receded into memory, its secrets laid bare, its shadows dispelled by the light of truth. Poirot adjusted his hat, his mind already turning to the next challenge, for where human hearts beat, there would always be puzzles to solve, and Hercule Poirot would be ready. The end.